Lesson 2.2 is about linear relations in functions. Today's lesson is mostly about coping with equations in standard form. We are going to look at how to find intercepts as well as how to graph lines in standard form, among other things. The first thing you need to know is that the degree of a function is represented by the highest power of any variables in it. So if you are asked what the degree of this is, the degree of this x is 1 because the power of that x is 1. The degree of this y is 1 because the power of that x is 1, and so the overall degree would be 1 because that is the highest power of any variable in this equation. If you look at the second one, 3x squared plus 9x equals 3y, you have this one with a degree of 2, this term with a degree of 1, this term with a degree of 1. Again, the highest one out of this is 2, and so that would be the degree. So what you need to understand about that, which is why we had to talk about degree, is that a linear function cannot have any variables higher than a degree of 1. Really, it should be 1, which we're going to talk about one of the examples here. And these are loose explanations. Again, kind of read about that in your book if you get a chance. But again, for the most part, you shouldn't have anything weird going on with your x's or y's or anything like that. And again, it cannot go any higher than 1. So if you are asked to determine whether the equation is linear, looking at this one here, that is a degree of 1. This is a degree of 2. Once you see a degree of 2, your answer is no, because it passed up that number. Now B, you might want to write in your notes, this is the same as y equals 6, because remember it might have been last section where we talked about how, function notation, this just replaces a y. And so because this is a degree of 1 and there's nothing higher than that, your answer to that is yes, it is linear. So again, h of x is the same as y. Y is a degree of 1 because the power of y is 1, and so therefore that is a yes. Now this is where it kind of gets crazy. That is a degree of 1, but this is just strange. And because that's strange, because it's underneath the root, that means it's not really a degree of 1, it's something else weird. Once you see that, your answer is no. And then D, 3y minus 4x equals 20, that is a degree of 1. This is the degree of 1, so your answer is yes. And so those are the kind of ideas you're looking at. So whenever you want to know if something's linear, it has to be a regular x and a regular y, or just a regular y, or in this case here, just a regular x. All those are linear, but once you have any squareds, once you have any square roots, there's even a question where you have like 1 over x plus 1 over y equals something. But again, since that's here, that's what you would call strange, like we have down here, and so that would not be linear either. But it should be a regular x, a regular y, and as long as that's the case, you do have a linear function there. Another thing we're going to talk about is the x-intercept, and the x-intercept is the value that results when you substitute y equals 0 into the equation. Think about it like this. You want your x-intercept, so you go to the y value and put a 0. But what does this really do to the equation if you don't mind plugging this in? When I go to plug in y equals 0, I end up with 4x plus 8 parentheses 0 equals 12. Make sure you copy this because I'm going to show you a common sense way to do this also. This turns into 4x plus 0 equals 12. And in the end, because that's a 0, we do not write the 0 also. So the question is, what does this do to the equation? It makes, sorry, I can't spell, y term disappear. So for the most part, whenever you plug in y equals 0, it's going to make the y term go away. And if you think about it, that's what we want, because if we want the x-intercept, we care about x, we don't care about y. And so really what we could have done is just kind of cover up the y with our finger and wrote what was there, 4x equals 12. So again, the common sense way to find the x-intercept is to ignore any y term in that problem. So anything that has a y in it, just rewrite it as if it wasn't there. And we'll work on that a little bit in this, and plus you'll get a little bit of practice on your homework. Just make sure you get good practice, because again, with this system, it makes it a lot easier to find your intercepts, and it saves you a lot of extra writing like this line and this line. When you go to find your x-intercept, you'll pretty much learn to go straight from here to here, and then everything else will work, because of course from there, if you want to write it, you divide by 4, getting the answer of x equals 3, and that would be your x-intercept. The y-intercept is the value that results when you substitute x equals 0 into the equation. Again, if you want the y-intercept, that means I don't want x. But what does that do to the equation? Let's look again. 5 parentheses 0 minus 3y equals 15. 5 parentheses 0 turns into 0 minus 3y equals 15. And again, I do not write the 0, so I end up with negative 3y equals 15. So what does it do? Whenever you plug in x equals 0, it makes the x term disappear. Because again, if I want the y-intercept, I need the x term to go away. I don't care about x, and so honestly what you do is you cover it up. Now the mistake that people make is they cover up everything and they put 3y equals 15, but just like I've told you, you have to consider the sign. The negative belongs to the 3, so you can honestly just do it by covering up the x term but not the negative attached to y, and that is your common sense way to do it, which is to again ignore any x term if you want the y-intercept. So again, you can feel free to do it this way. When you divide by negative 3, you end up with y equals negative 5, and that would give you your y-intercept. But again, the key thing is, if you can't think of the common sense way, just plug in 0 for x, plug in 0 for y. But the common sense way is, if I want the x-intercept, ignore every y. If I want the y-intercept, ignore every x, and that way you at least end up with what you want. And an easy way to think about it is, if I want the y-intercept, I should end up with y equals something. If I want the x-intercept, I should end up with x equals something, which tells me I did it right. There is no way that your x-intercept is y equals something, or that your y-intercept is x equals something. So kind of keep that in mind again as you work on this, on your homework, and as you kind of get this down. Now this is where we actually have to use the intercept, because in order to graph a standard form graph, standard form being ax by equals c, x and y on one side, constant on the other side, you honestly have to find the intercept. So what I would do is I would put x-intercept here, and again for my x-intercept I am going to ignore y. So go up here, and if we were to write this without the y, we would cover this up because it's not important, and what I see left over is 3x equals 12. And what that tells me is that x is equal to 4. So that means on the x-axis, go to where 4 is. This is your x-axis, that's a negative 4, this is a positive 4. That would be your dot. That's how easy that is. If I want my y-intercept, because I need both, again, y-intercept means ignore x. Remember, you do not want to cover up the negative, just cover up the x term, and what I see left over there is negative 4y equals 12. And when I divide that by negative 4, I get y equals negative 3. On the y-axis, negative 3 is down here. And again, of course, you would use a straight edge on a test. But for the sake of notes, it's okay to just go ahead and write that there. That would be your line, because if you remember from Algebra 1, it takes 2 points to make a line. Those are my 2 points. That's all I have to do. Alright? So again, anytime it's in standard form, find your x-intercept by ignoring y, find your y-intercept by ignoring x, plot both of those numbers, be careful with your negative, and that'll get it done. Alright? Same thing here, graph 2x minus y equals 4. So what I notice is that this is standard form, x and y on one side, number on the other side. So I will again look for my x-intercept first by ignoring y. When I do that, all I see left over is 2x equals 4, which means that x is equal to 2. That means your x value is going to be on the x-axis where 2 is. When I want my y-intercept, I'm going to ignore x, but again, don't forget that the negative is attached to y. So I end up with negative y equals 4, which whenever I work that out, y is equal to negative 4, goes down here, and again draw your best straight line all the way across the region, and that should do it. But that is how you will graph standard form. Now we will see a section in here where we'll talk about slope-intercept form. I hope you remember that. That's a very important process, or a very important form for you. But for right now, we're just looking at standard form in this section, so we're going to kind of keep that and not really confuse you with all that stuff yet. But as you see these questions, just remember that you need to make sure you know how to do x-intercept and y-intercept, and that you either use the common sense form like I'm doing, or you at least have mastered or practiced doing 3x plus minus 4 parentheses 0, or 3 parentheses 0 minus 4y to get your intercepts. Last thing we need to do on this, talking about application problems, because another thing they want you to do is be able to translate an application problem that is in a standard form type of setup. And what you'll notice is that they typically have two variables. Notice here, you've got something times x, something times y equals a number. Typically what's going to happen is it's something times x, something times y equals a total. But again, we'll see that in this example. and you'll also see it in some of the work that we'll see over the course of these next couple weeks, next few weeks, because I am going to introduce you to some of these things, but just make sure you're ready for them whenever you see them. The example here says Latanya earns a commission of $175 for each magazine subscription that she sells. It's supposed to say subscription there, and $150 for each newspaper subscription that she sells. Her goal is to earn a total of $525 in commission. In the next 2 weeks, write an equation to model the situation. The equation, if you notice, if you haven't remember that, each magazine subscription would be 175M, because that's one amount that they're going to sell, and then 150 for each newspaper subscription, so that would be plus 1.50N, and you want a total of 525. So again, 175 per each magazine subscription plus 150 per each newspaper subscription equals 525, and that is your initial setup. Now, the reason you need to be able to do that, and the reason it's smart to use variables that make sense, not just x and y, is because if you have this problem continue, then you can actually do what you need to do. It says if she sells 100 magazine subscriptions, how many newspaper subscriptions must she have to accomplish her goal? Again, this is 100 magazine subscriptions, which means that 100 should go in here. So we would do 175 times 100 plus 1.50N equals 525. I think I did explain to you that in this chapter you will have some problems where you might want to use a calculator, and that's fine because you can use a calculator on your test. Just try to do as much as you can without it. 100 times 175 means I move it twice, so that's 175 plus 150N equals 525. Solving this like we would, we subtract 175 from both sides. That'll be what, 50 makes it 2, so 350 I believe is what that is. Let's make sure. 525 minus 175. I'm silly. So yeah, 350 is that number, and then in the end you divide by 150. And again, I don't really need you to do that anymore because you did chapter 1. So 350 divided by 1.50 is 233.3. And so in this case, we do have a decimal, but let's think about this. This is going to get me to the $525. We would typically round down and say 233, but if 233.3 is what I need to make this, kind of like the other problem where we had to, even though we would make sense to round up, you had to stay down. This makes sense that you have to do 234 subscriptions, because we've just seen that 233.3 is when she actually meets her goal. And of course you can't sell 1/3 of a subscription, so the only thing you can do is bump it up to the next one for 234. There are questions like that exist. Just make sure you're ready for those things, and again, as you face them and as you see them, feel free to come back, ask me about it. There's a lot of subtle things that I can't really tell you directly that you have to kind of experience, and I'll talk you through after you bring it up. But just make sure again that you're getting the most work out of this as you can, and that again you're answering questions as you see them. Other than that, go ahead and go to your Math XL, and good luck.